Hi, this is Jim from Slick Cyber Systems. I'm joined with Chris Reimiller from Slick Cyber Systems and Brandon Krieger, President and CEO of KNSS Consulting Group. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
we're going to be having a little chat today about what happens after a breach, a cyber breach. Um, almost like a play-by-play, of incident response thing. First, before we kick into that, do you want to tell us a little bit about KNSS?
For sure,
Where we're
yeah.
from.
KNSS Consulting has been around for quite some time. Started, 2001 to 2000, then transitioned 2011. I was marketing company to 2011, where I was really looking at cybersecurity and what was going on in the industry. Running a marketing company, you kind of look at, websites and digital products and things like that. It's all great, it's exciting. But then what happens is I noticed a lot of my clients were getting compromised. So I really kind of looked at, okay, where was the industry going, what was happening, and that kind of got my introduction to the cybersecurity world. Then fast forward to the last 3 4 years, I worked for the incident response company, and it really opened kind of get you behind the curtains. What you really see, because you can hear about manufacturing here. Then, oh,
Yeah,
we stop ransomware. We do it. We have next generation, and you're never get compromised. But when you're on your first incident response call and they go, I use that product X and I got compromised, and you go like from someone who was selling products and organ manufacturer go, oh, I sold that. What do you mean it doesn't work? What do you mean you had a ransomware event? So you must have had it on one system, the one system that didn't have the solution. No, through the whole environment. So that kind of got me
yeah,
the introduction of, okay, what really is cybersecurity? What does it really mean to secure your environment? So through that, I worked through as an incident response, lead to manager, then moved over to advisory because I knew more and more organizations were looking for help, looking for guidance. What do we do? Post, even pre-activities. So from there, transition from the company I work for now, reestablishing KNSS Consulting to really look at helping organizations understand cybersecurity to help reduce. Now, you're never going to eliminate, but reduce an impact on an event where the team is proactive, they're reactive to a situation, they're able to remediate quickly, so the impact is minimal.
yeah. Gotcha. Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, then so knowing that, let's jump right into, uh, you know, obviously you told us what your company does. So
Mhm.
how do most businesses first discover that they've even been breached?
We hear a lot of the times someone informs them, either one, and I'll go through like there's a business email compromise, network intrusion, or a ransomware. The ransomware is generally the worst because someone calls at 4 o'clock in the morning because I can't get in my system. The
Yeah,
server's not working. Like, why can't I get access to email or data or whatever? And then all of a sudden the investigation starts. IT starts to get involved, going, well, the server was not in maintenance. It's not down. Let me look into it. And all of a sudden they notice the server's been encrypted, and then all of a sudden the team starts to get a war room going, the calls start happening, the texts start happening that, hey, I think we've been hit. And then what happens is then you start to get the security team involved, right? And hopefully, knock on wood, depending on the size of the company, they have a security team. Some small business to mid-sized companies, the IT person is, all hats, right? They wear the IT, the database administrator, the security person, the accountant, the CFO, all in one, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
normally through that, they kind of figure out, okay, we've been hit. But what does that mean? We've got a ransomware event. What does that mean by we had a ransomware? What's encrypted? So now they start going through an investigation. Right? What has actually really been impacted? So they look at servers, they look at endpoints, laptops, desktops. They look at, do we have an encryption event throughout the whole environment, or is it certain segments that have been hit? Right now, I've worked with global companies where now they start looking at pulling the network traffic, right, to make sure it doesn't transverse from Mexico to China to US to Canada, right? Because if they caught it in one area, they don't want it to transverse over to the next. So they start going through this investigation process, right, as we all know. And then eventually, when they have it, they're at a point where, yeah, we have a ransomware event. That's when the bell starts going off. That's where now your cybersecurity incident response team, hopefully they have one, gets engaged, right? And then they start to look at investigation. If they can find patient zero, they pull it offline. Here's a key thing that most companies don't know: pull it offline, but don't turn it off, right? So they disconnect the network card, keep it on the side, And the reason why that is because you got to collect forensics evidence, right? Because a lot of times you'll capture a full disk image of that. So a forensics team will come in and investigate. Couldn't they find out what happened? How did that threat actor get into the system? Where did they transverse? Did they exfiltrate any data? So as much as you can keep that system up and have that data available, it's going to be better for the investigation to find out what exactly happened. So through
Awesome.
that, you got your technical team working. Then you got your senior leadership. So your senior leadership is now calling, and this is all happening in swim lanes. Like you're talking within an hour. Your senior leadership's calling your insurance broker, right? Saying, hey, we have an event. We want to report that we have a cybersecurity incident. They'll start to look at, okay, what's your policy? They'll start to look at, okay, who's our team that we want you to work with? Counsel, like we normally call breach coach. Digital forensics, do you need on site, do you need an incident response company? They'll line that up, and most of that gets lined up within an hour. So by now you're an hour or two, all of a sudden you start to see now you're on a call, right? You're on a call with them, you're starting to go through it. Now they're like, oh, can you explain what happened? Well, at 2:00 in the morning, Fred called me, said he can't access the server. We walked in, all our servers are encrypted, this is down. They'll ask you about the environment, backups, how many endpoints, what versions. They'll go through all that. So as you're going through this incident, right, and you're kind of really doing the investigation, going through that, looking at if you can contain the environment, you start to stop. A lot of companies will start to deploy their own tools. Could be CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, doesn't matter. They want to look at visibility and containment. Once they get that done, they collect the forensics, collect all the logs, collect all the firewall logs, SIM logs, data logs, anything they can get. Then they'll start to look to see if they can start to move forward. So this is happening here in one swim lane. The next one is they start to look at, most of the companies have a threat actor negotiator. So that threat actor negotiator will say, okay, I'm going to go on the dark web with the information. I'm going to start looking at, is there a form or is there some chat bot that I can start talking to these people? What would you like me to say? Through that, now you look at containment, remediation, and then negotiating with the threat actor. Now, most companies that can contain and remediate, they'll only prolong the negotiation. If they can, then you're looking at decryptors. So you're looking at negotiating for a decryptor and going that. So going through all that process and the forensics investigation and finding out, you kind of come to the end of the investigation. So a lot of times the forensics team says, okay, here you go. Here's your report. Here's what we find. Now, depending on counsel, you might get a verbal report or you might get a written report. A lot of times they only give you a verbal report. So most of the time, the team is writing furiously, okay, patch management, they got in this way, the network's been compromised, this has happened, they got in through a phishing campaign, so we have the email, so they write all this down. So now the company hopefully now creates a roadmap and says, okay, this is critical, this is what we start to have to plug holes, put security controls in place to monitor that so that we can detect better if we find anything along that line. And then most of the time at that point, we advise companies go through a security controls assessment. Kind of go a full stroke. What's in your environment? How are you using it? Then you're looking at people, process, and technology. What the technology in your environment, are you using it properly? Is it tuned properly? Do you have the process in place to run it properly through the environment? And are your people trained properly to use the tools? Right. And then a lot of times you talk about tabletop exercise. Okay, let's put you through your due diligence. Are you running them in an event that you can do it? Because a lot of times people say, oh, we've got a policy, standing operating procedure. It works this way. We have a disaster recovery plan. Then you do a tabletop exercise and they're like, well, it's supposed to work like that. And they're like, okay, well, and I had one where it's a tabletop exercise. I said, okay, what's your you have your offsite backups. How long does it take for you to get them? They're like an hour, 2 hours. I said, okay, let's go through that in the tabletop exercise. They ended up finding it was 72 hours.
Ooh.
Right? Because what happens is, you guys know, they have to extract the drives, right? They have to make sure they're viable. They have to scan them to make sure they're ready, and then they have to ship them out.
Right.
Well, by the time that's all done, you're talking 1 or 2 days, right? So now that client has to look at, you're not down for an hour, you're down business operations for 3 days to receive the drives. That's not talking about restoration.
Right. Yeah, you got to do the work.
Exactly. So you kind of go through that, you do your due diligence, kind of go through your tabletop exercise, you make sure. And a lot of that time is, in most organizations, sadly, it's a sprint, right? Because they're trying to recover the business continuity. They're trying to make sure they can actually do business, right? And they're now looking at how their partners, their clients are looking at, board of directors, investors, all across, right? So they're now looking at how is this impacting our business? Right? Are we losing money in all different areas of the business? Like a lot of times people think I lose money because I'm not dealing with clients, but there's could be penalties, there could be insurance, there could be actual costs of the actual engagement itself. Like how much money have you had to spend to go for the restoration? Did you have to pay for on-site staff? Did you have to look at overtime? Like what does that all include? So
And you still have your
really looking
employees to pay, in the meantime while you're not productive. So it's like,
100%, right?
yeah, it's double loss, in my eyes. So have you ever found that there are those who would want to cover it up, or kind of bury their head in the sand and pretend like something didn't happen, from a public statement side?
I'm gonna kind of, because I've worked with counsel, a lot of times they want to protect the challenge
Reputation.
of reputation as well as
Sure.
any tenant penalties or anything like that that they don't need to. Because a lot of times what happens is companies don't know, small to mid-sized companies don't know the penalties. So they're too scared of privacy and the data privacy, depending on the state or depending on their compliance and regulatory. They're nervous of being able to report it because we're going to pay massive fines, we're going to lose our certification or compliance. So they don't understand it. So like you said, they're kind of hesitant about who do we report to. And that's why a lot of times you have to get the breach coach in to say, okay, who do we report to? Because they keep that buffer between your law enforcement agencies, compliance and regulatory, to any type of legal or criminal actions. Because if there's, and I've only seen this once in my career where there's gross negligence, where they knew there was a fault, they didn't take action, they accepted the risk, and it was a high risk. Because a lot of times, and I'll give you an example, if you get a pen test or a vulnerability scan, right, you're supposed to do the remediations, and what they can sell is due care and due diligence, what a prudent person would do in a timely manner, right? Now,
Right.
these guys had vulnerability assessments that they knew there was critical vulnerabilities, and the pen test proved it as well for years, repeatedly. Like it wasn't the point where it was like, okay, we found a new one, there's a new version this year, there's a newer version next year, and you just got to keep remediating. It was say 3 years ago, found the critical vulnerability, didn't remediate, they caught it on a report, caught in the next report, same one, caught in the next report, the next one. So that's gross negligence.
Absolutely.
Right? And it was critical vulnerabilities. It wasn't low, right? Where it's like, okay, you have,
Right.
say, and we find this a lot, an archaic accounting software. Got to keep your accounting software for 7 years, right? Some people move to QuickBooks, but some you have to keep old. So they have an old server that's underneath someone's desk that they only spin up when they need to get the records. But a lot of times it's offline, right? So you don't really have to worry about. These were systems that were live, public facing.
Wow.
So as you guys know, like that's a big no-no in our industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen to that. Oh man. You covered so much already. Like of course, the incident response plan. We talked about that. You talked about that, very specifically. So I don't want to beat on that anymore. Um, you know, when is it time? And I know you kind of covered the timeline here, but should you even contact a breach attorney? Should you get a hold of counsel?
100%. There's sometimes where you might have an alert, right? There's an alert. There's some activities, a malicious activity. If you can remediate that in house, and there's no encryption, data exfiltration, there's minimal impact. There's no really need to actually call your breach coach or your outside insurance broker to tell them that, because you remediate it. It wasn't an impact. The threshold I found is there client data that's been compromised? Is there data that's compromised by your partners? Has there been something that is systems that have been compromised that your third party, your partners have access to? If it's a limited, and I'll use my example, if my laptop right now got compromised, but I caught it, I have say CrowdStrike on it. It caught it. They tried to get in. I was able to stop it. That's not a reportable incident. Now they got my system and then moved laterally to say, Jim, your system has administrative rights, and started to go through the server and started to look at doing reconnaissance, and
Now
potentially now you're looking at this might be reportable, right? Because now they have access to client data, maybe information, critical information, right? There's might be sensitive information. So now you have to look at, okay, let's talk to counsel And it's always recommended. And again, anyone that's listening to it, if you have questions, talk to a breach coach. All right, talk to a breach coach and say, okay, what's my risk and liability? Who should I be reporting? This is the incident. You'll be under privilege, so everything will be secure and private. So you talk to them and they'll say, yes, you need to report, or no, you've got it under control. Nothing was really truly compromised. And sometimes they'll want you to go through an instant response just to go through the investigation because you don't know what you don't know.
Right. Yeah, good point. That is well put. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So, breach coach, to define that for our audience.
Yeah.
If you would.
Yeah, breach coach is basically your lawyer. Right? It's your lawyer through the entire event that keeps everything under privilege and protects the company that they don't do anything that could leave them liable for a lawsuit or criminal activity or any compromise for any type of compliance or regulatory. So they know your compliance or regulatory between your state, your governments. If you look at, you have UK like GDPR, they understand all of those. So they can tell you and guide you through that to say, what's your liability, what's your risk, where do you need to be protected, and what actions you need to take on a legal standpoint. Now, some of them are very good. They understand the technical side too, because they've been doing it for so long. So they can guide you like, yeah, I think you need on-site support. I think you need to look at upgrading those servers. I've heard in other incidents, you have an older version of that server. A lot of my clients are updating. You have your segmentation is not set properly. You have a flat network. You need to start segmenting. I've heard that on other calls with other clients. So they can guide you that too. But then they bring in the subject matter experts to say, okay, they'll actually guide you how to do it and why.
Cool. That is extremely important, to understand and to know that you need to have a point of contact and preferably legal.
100%.
And if you're a small 1-2 person shop, you know what I mean, or a true small business, you might want to originally lean on your MSP to do that, and then hey, there's something else going on here, and maybe it's the MSP or MSSP anyway, that first detects it, assuming they're working with an MSP, not just fully internal staff. So,
well, and to your point is, a lot of times it's a collaborative effort. They're part of your CERT team, right? Because they're doing your SIM, they're managing your servers, they're managing your backups, right? They're even managing like your firewalls. So your MSP or MSSP will be part of that conversation. I've been part of numerous events where everyone's brought in, council gets everyone to sign an NDA, non-disclosure, that everyone's on the same board, especially the third parties. Because a lot of times when you get these contracts, they're tripart agreements. So what that means for the audience is it's your carrier, the legal, right, the forensics company, and then the client. So those ones are the ones that generally are part of the agreement. Then what happens, anyone else that comes in, council wants to make sure it's under their privilege. So say an MSP or an MSSP comes in, they'll make sure there's a non-disclosure signed with them so they know, and they'll be part of the technical conversation and part of every single stand-up and meeting or war room that's created to be able to have those conversations, because they might have better insight to the environment, what's going on, how it's set up, how it's configured, how is it segmented and how it's segmented, where's the encryption, security, how's the backup. So pulling them in is very essential part of your incident response plan and making sure you're executing it in the chance that you have an event, because they're going to be able to do a lot more research than maybe your IT team because they have more visibility.
right, exactly. Awesome. Just reading my notes.
I do have a question. But now we've gone through like an incident happens, and what we have to do to remediate, to report, to deal with the backlash and the damage to your reputation, clients, such like that. What do you find is the kind of overarching or commonality of why businesses don't have something in place to protect themselves, or don't kind of connect one on one to say there's reality, like it's happening to little companies, big companies. Why do they believe it's not going to affect me, or what are you seeing that piece being?
Understanding its priority, right? It's priority of the business strategy and business goals. A lot of times they're focused on manufacturing, service delivery, looking at operations, looking at their internal systems, IT, right? The five nines, as we know, right? Keeping all that going, managing their staff. Security sometimes takes that back step because I'm not that big of a company. No, that they're really not going to come after me, but I need to be profitable and I need to look at my profit centers versus my cost centers. So they're not looking at security as we know as a cost center. You're investing in money, but it's hard for companies to get money back from that, right? Unless they offer services. Other than that, it's a cost center. So they're looking at focusing on their IT environment, making sure their databases, their application, their software, their infrastructure, maybe their CRM and our ERP systems are all up, right? And that's critical for them. So security then takes a back step. So they only get what's essential. Right now, the one thing that we're finding right now is as insurance is starting to push them. So anytime most companies, if not all, have to get cybersecurity insurance. But you have to go through an evaluation and say, what do you have in your security controls? Do you have MFA, two-factor authentication set? Do you have a SIM? When's your last time you did a pen test? When's the last time you did a vulnerability assessment? So they're starting to push companies now, doesn't matter what size, to now start to implement security controls. Now, it's no longer where you can check a box, right? And that's the biggest thing that a lot of organizations are finding now is if you get into an incident and you just check the box, but you don't have the control, when you make a claim, it's denied.
Yep.
Right? Now that
as it should be.
$100,000, $250,000 ransomware event, you were hoping insurance is going to cover, right? If not more, depending on the size of the organization, they're going denied. And they're like, why? Well, you didn't have 2FA on administrative accounts. You didn't have the SIM. You said you did, but you didn't. It's not, we don't see the technical control, right? So we heard from the teams that come in, 2FA was not set. You said on your actual application when we were looking at your policy that you had it in place. It's not. Sorry, claims denied.
Yeah, and it's just that quick.
Yeah,
and yeah, I mean, well, you're lying on an insurance document. I mean, and you're lying to yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you have nobody but yourself. Look in the mirror, as the business owner or CEO or whoever is in charge. But yeah, I mean, cost center or not, is still the sword and shield, and somebody's got to defend the fort, and or something has to defend the fort.
Especially this day of doing business. It's not like in the 80s or 90s, you had a filing cabinet. Like you're not worrying the threat actor getting to the filing cabinet. They have to actually break into the actual office, right? And get access to the documents. Now your documents are digital. They're accessible online, right? Unless you have cold storage offline, with most companies don't. They're using SaaS solutions, right? And as we know, like a lot of these times when SaaS solutions up, they're not putting two-factor authentication on it. They're not having complex passwords. Right? They're having problems with phishing campaigns, right? So what happens is they're not looking at, getting phished from, an email source, right? So they're not taking all these in consideration because it's not going to happen to us. But then when it does, then all of a sudden it's like the house is burning down, right? All hands on deck. Everyone needs to be there.
Right. So transitioning then to that thought, it's not just an IT issue. Right. This is a business survival strategy. It needs to be a strategy. And I think a lot of CEOs, owners, right?
That's where I wanted to talk about. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about next. Yeah.
Just absolutely turn it off in their head. As you said before, that they're worrying about the, keeping the cost centers as low as possible, profit centers as high as possible, the lean and mean strategy. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but if you are even half alive in 2025, that was a rhyme. You and you're watching the news, over the last 5 years. I mean, my gosh, it's just getting more and more and more problematic. The cybersecurity. If think of it just from the pure business standpoint, I need to know who owes me money, right?
Right.
AR. I need to know who I owe money to, AP, accounts payable. What about your customer master? Do you know who your customers are? What did they order? What about the IP that you've got in there, intellectual property, that's buried into that? You start to look at all these pieces or layers of the onion, if you will, You know, I think top management a lot of times just gets blind to it, and they say, "Oh, wow, we're running lean and mean. This is our best quarter ever." Da, da, da. Well, it won't be the day that you get a problem, a big problem. Even a little problem can turn into a big problem. So, how do we convince these people to
Embrace.
get your crap
Yeah.
together? That oftentimes mystifies me. Other than giving them all the stats in the world, it's like how do you leverage? What have you seen? That people do. To get these people off their tail.
Their tush, their butt.
Yeah, yeah. They're
Well, I think it comes down to a couple conversations too. Is they have to relate to the incident. Other than that, like you said, they're competing with their internally themselves. They're competing with their competition, right, in the market, trying to get to that next quarter, right? Like you said, you're looking at their profit margins. They're looking at EBITDA. They're looking at all that to say, did we move the needle up? Yes, great, we did. Or we had a little bit of slow quarter. Okay, what are we gonna do next quarter to make it more profitable? We'll lean out the business. We'll do that. Like they're always looking at money and dollars. Understandable, right? And I get that on a business standpoint, being a VC for many, many clients. The challenge comes down to that we see is, are you protected to the point where if something was to happen, you wouldn't close your business? And I've seen, which is sadly, I've seen companies go through ransomware events where it literally closed their business because they couldn't afford it, right? It wasn't a point where like we know, whereas, companies make 50, $100 million and maybe they have a $250,000 event. It hurts in
hurts.
the profitability on that year and their EBITDA and all that, but they can survive that. But if you have a
Right.
company that makes $1 million a year and they have payroll, they're maybe in a little bit of debt, they're not having good quarters, and then all of a sudden a $250,000 incident, that could break them as an organization.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they could have put remediation steps or controls in place, like some sort of mail filter, two-factor authentication, an antivirus, that could have saved them from the event, right? Some, even KnowBe4, you're looking at, cybersecurity awareness training. If
Yep.
they could have put those controls in place, and maybe it would have cost $30,000 for the year, they could have done that. That would have maintained their business. And then again, looking at how we make more money, for sure, but they could have maintained their business versus being at that point where they have to decide, do we have to lay people off? Can we still function in business? Because something that we talked about at the end
Yeah.
of the event, do you lose brand reputation? So you lose clients.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now,
And especially like a law firm or
Financial.
firm. I mean, my
Yeah.
gosh, that people would be.
MSSP, we see this third party liability where you have a third party, and we see threat actors go after them because they know they're the keys to the kingdom a lot of times because they can compromise one business and get access to 1,000 companies.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes they don't have separation of duties, two-factor authentication. The remote control tools are not secure enough. So they know if they get into that hub, that control unit, how they manage their clients, they can now move laterally to all their clients and compromise them.
Right.
So we see that, and all of a sudden they lose. Again, you and I know, if I'm a client, financial, manufacturing, whatever, finance, and my MSP gets compromised, and I hear all their clients are getting compromised, I'm jumping ship.
Yep.
I'm going to someone who's more secure.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. It's scary.
Of the customers, or I should say, clients that you've witnessed that have had some sort of an event, what if you were to generically apply a percentage to them as a group, what percentage survives, and continues to grow, and continue to do business, and what percentage do you feel it goes the way of the dodo, just disappears, dries up, blows away, whatever?
From the clients I worked with, I've only had one that I know of that's gone kind of the way of the dodo, had to close their business, right?
Okay.
The rest of them, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. Like, and again, I'll talk on this. There's probably about 10 or 15%, maybe 20% that are SMB to mid-sized companies where now it's a struggle, right? Because that's a big event. They've lost brand reputation. They lost some revenue. Now they're having to pay, resources and time. And after that, and they're looking at now the cost of new tools in the environment, 20, 30, 40, even $100,000, maybe in some upgrades and looking at segmentation, going from on-prem to cloud. So they're looking at all that expense coming up because now they want to be secure, but they're not able to make that revenue back as quickly to cover those costs. So then they kind of struggle, right, for a quarter or 2 quarters to try to figure that out. Now, as we know, depending on the economy, we're seeing a kind of hit on that. Now that drops them too, right? So in combination, I would say about 30 to 40% of what's like SMB to midsize, I see in that. Now, when you get large to, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, it's an inconvenience. They don't want to go through it, but they're able to cope through it.
Absorb the cost.
An incident, trying to kind of see the other side of it. But it's that sweet spot as we deal with is the SMB to mid-market who really get impacted.
Yeah, and that's typically all we take care of. We don't do Fortune 500, Fortune 100. We stick with the SMB community, and borderline mid-market. But yeah, it's just, if there's one thing I wish I could teach, all leadership. I don't care if you're a one-person shop or 20 bazillion. Just take the time to listen to your IT consultants and get some IT consultants, so at least you have some degree of expertise, because they're doing it for multiple companies every day, whether it's an MSP, MSSP, a company like yourselves, in security, cybersecurity. I mean, it's you've got to just take the time, bring people in, listen to them, and follow their recommendations. It's going to save you your company in the long run, your job, most likely. So,
as well as I do, the CTO, the CIO, right? Even the CISO, if there's an incident, they're the ones that are generally going to lose their jobs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. And it's because what happens is organizations like the CEO, the president of the company, the board of directors, all are looking for that person to guide security.
Right.
Guide IT, guide security. What do we need to do? We hired you because you're an expert in the field and you are the ones making sure our business is protected. Doesn't matter what you need to do. You gotta also look at what you're saying, and I agree with you, the technical people, what they need, but also translate that to the business on what does that really mean? What do we leave? Because a lot of times, and as much as I do, is you get security consultants that throw a lot of tools at senior leadership, and they're like, I don't know what that means. What's CrowdStrike and Sentinel-1 and EDR and MDR and SIM? And okay, you're throwing a lot of acronyms. What do I need to know? And a lot of times it's risk and liability, right?
Yeah.
What's your risk in this environment and what's your liability as a business? If you can understand that and speak that language to them, that's when you start converting them to kind of go, okay, I understand my risk. I understand the liability of it. And now I want to buy into what we need to do. And especially when you look at a risk calculator, risk criteria, when you say, like, a lot of times you go, oh, your endpoints, your laptops and desktops are vulnerable. Okay, well, so what? Well, your servers are vulnerable, and that's where your core data and your client data, and like you said, your intellectual property, if that gets affected, you could lose $10,000 a day. Whoa. $10,000 a day, that's your risk, right? Your liability is now brand reputation, losing your clients, penalties, things
loss
along
of revenue,
instant response. And then they go, okay, what is it going to cost me? And this is the other thing that, we know and we have to educate is the cost equal to the actual, impact or incident? Because if you're going to get a security control, it's $100,000, but the impact is $5,000. It doesn't equate. It doesn't equal out. Right. If the control is $5,000 and the impact is $100,000, they're going to pay for that all day.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to lose $100,000 and it's going to cost me $5,000 to remediate that. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And that's the conversations we have to have with these executives, the board, because then they understand, God, you're not just looking at selling us a tool. You're looking at what does that mean for our business?
Plain English and plain business English, not geek speak.
Yeah,
absolutely. Exactly. Cool. Awesome. Chris, do you have any more questions?
No, it's been very helpful. Yeah, I love this conversation.
That was a fantastic conversation. I don't know if you'd want to have one at some other point in time, but let me do the an outro here, and then we can maybe hang on for another couple of minutes. Again, this is Jim from Slick Cyber Systems. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Chris Rymiller from Slick Cyber Systems, and again, Brandon Krieger, President CEO, and fractional CISO, vCISO. Whew, I had to get all that down. KNSS Consulting Group, Inc., phenomenal company. Definitely, your website is knssconsulting.com, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, check them out. Good stuff, real good stuff. So,
Yep.
Brandon, thank you so much again for being with us, and we'll talk shortly.
Oh, thanks, guys.
If you find this content helpful, please like the video, subscribe, and share with your friends and your colleagues. Thank you.